This is Reverend Dr. William J. Barber, and we are listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Good morning.
And of course, wouldn't be a Ralph Nader Radio Hour without the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hey, hello, everybody. Are the political sands shifting or not?
You know, the ultimate mission of every public interest campaign is to become obsolete. You want to be effective, make change happen, and achieve your policy goal. In November 2022, Roots Action launched their Step Aside Joe campaign, which called for President Biden to stand down as the 2024 Democratic nominee. Well, 20 months later, Step Aside Joe is living the dream. Joe Biden has ended his re-election campaign. Our first guest is Jeff Cohen, co-founder and policy director at Roots Action. Step Aside Joe is one of their many campaigns dedicated to galvanizing people who are committed to economic fairness, equal rights for all, civil liberties, environmental protection, and defunding endless wars. We'll speak to him about what happens now that Joe has stepped aside. Our second guest today is Harvey Rosenfield. Harvey and Ralph go back a long, long way. Harvey came up through the ranks of Public Citizen in the 70s, and then Harvey moved to California and founded his own public interest group, Consumer Watchdog. For decades, Consumer Watchdog has been one of the nation's most aggressive consumer advocates, taking on politicians of both parties and the special interests that fund them. One of their most significant victories took place in the late 80s with the passage of Prop 103 in California. Harvey and Ralph campaigned up and down the state against three competing propositions that were heavily funded by the insurance industry. Prop 103 protects consumers from arbitrary insurance rates and practices, to encourage a competitive marketplace, and to ensure that insurance is fair, available, and affordable for all Californians. It saved Californians billions of dollars since 1988. It was a classic case of David knocking out Goliath. But lo and behold, Goliath has gotten up off the mat, and with the endorsement of its cornerman, Governor Gavin Newsom, is attempting to roll back many of the gains provided by Prop 103. We're going to talk to Harvey about what this could mean for Californians, and more importantly, what the implications could be for insurance consumers nationally. As always, somewhere in the middle, we'll check in with our incorruptible corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhyber. But first, Joe has stepped aside. What happens next? David?
Jeff Cohen is co-founder and policy director at Roots Action. He is a media critic, columnist, documentary filmmaker, and retired journalism professor who founded the media watch group FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. That was back in 1986. For years, he was a regular pundit on CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC discussing issues of media and politics. And he is the author of Cable News Confidential, My Misadventures in Corporate Media. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Jeff Cohen.
It's an honor to be on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Great to be with you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And apropos what David just said, why aren't you on all these TV stations, CNN and MSNBC, since you're part of a group called Roots Action, which has been sponsoring the Step Aside Joe campaign for about 20 months. So you were early, you were right. Are you getting mass media?
Not a lot of mass media. We're considered premature Step Aside Joe advocates, like the premature anti-fascists who were witch hunted right after World War II ended. But no, we have not been invited a lot onto mainstream media. We feel we accomplished a lot. You know, we're an activist group, Roots Action. We worked with a lot of progressives and public interest-minded people over the last 20 months to send this message forward that Joe Biden is a weak candidate. He can't articulate a popular vision that could galvanize voters. To bring our message forward, we took out ads in the Hill, which is read all over Capitol Hill and the White House. We had one ad that depicted Democrats in Congress with their heads literally in the sand. Get your heads out of the sand. This guy can't defeat the extremist threat represented by MAGA and Donald Trump. We once ran a help wanted ad, full page in the Hill, seeking a Democrat in Congress that would run against Joe Biden. So we've labored, we've got thousands and thousands of emails sent by constituents to their Democratic senators and House representatives, calling for Joe to step aside, calling for them to tell Joe to step aside. It shouldn't have taken this horrific debate performance of a few weeks ago.
Jeff, it looks now it's going to be Kamala Harris. She's already got a majority of the Biden delegates endorsing her prior to the convention in August in Chicago. And now the challenge is reminiscent of Hubert Humphrey and Lyndon Baines Johnson. And when Hubert Humphrey ran for president in 1968, he was LBJ's vice president. He had to face the question, is he going to stay loyal to Johnson's position on the Vietnam War, which is keep putting in more troops, blowing the place apart, or is he going to be faithful to his own personal judgment, which was to find a way to get out of the Vietnam War? He chose the former, to be loyal. He didn't distance himself, and he lost the election by a small margin to Richard Nixon. Now, what's the challenge for Kamala Harris? Spell it out.
It's the exact same challenge, Ralph. You laid that out so importantly. And for our younger listeners, they should study that 1968 history. I was 16 years old. I was already a peace and civil rights activist when Lyndon Johnson stunned the political world by announcing that he was not going to seek re-election. It was a happy, happy day for those of us that had been opposing the Vietnam War. And then we watched Hubert Humphrey, the vice president, the heir apparent. He just did not separate himself from this very unpopular foreign war. So we're in that same exact boat today. The public is against this war. The public sees what it is. It's mass slaughter of civilians being conducted by Israel with U.S. weapons. The Democratic Party base is overwhelmingly opposed to this war. They don't want any guns going to Israel, any weapons, any bombs going to Israel. A few days ago, 7 national unions came out for an end to any more weaponry going from the United States government to Israel while this slaughter is continuing. And those
Which ones were they?
The unions supporting this include the Association of Flight Attendants, the American Postal Workers Union. I was once an elected steward in that union, the International Union of Painters, the NEA, that's the National Education Association, the SEIU, Service Employees International Union, the United Auto Workers, and the United Electrical Workers, UE. It's a great group of unions. And NEA is huge, and SEIU is huge. And the United Auto Workers, with their new leadership, has won one of the most important strikes in recent history. So, I mean, you have all of these constituencies that want a change in policy. Ralph, it's so reminiscent of what you and I witnessed in 1968. The base of the party is for peace and social justice, not for continual expansion of the military budget. People forget that the Democratic platform in 2020 called for a reduction in military spending, and Joe Biden has increased military spending every year. So there's a base of the Democratic Party that wants to defeat this neo-fascist threat represented by Trump. These are young activists. These are racial justice activists. These are progressive Jewish activists. These are Muslim and Arab American activists. They've all said, we want this policy changed, this immoral slaughter of the civilian population of Gaza. And it's up to Kamala Harris. Where is she going to go? We're waiting to see what she's going to do.
Well, put yourself in her position. She's going to meet with Netanyahu in the White House with Joe Biden. The pressure on her, because of the horrendous position of the Congress, all the sadistic Republicans and half of the Democrats support Biden's Palestine Holocaust policy. In fact, Biden has lightened up on Netanyahu in the last 2-3 weeks Netanyahu's going even crazier. He's bombing Israeli designated safe areas in Gaza. He tells people, take your little babies and children and go to this area. It's safe. And then they blow it up. This is a savagery that is hard to exceed in any inter-nation conflict. And what needs to be done is to recognize that the probability that she's going to walk out of that White House and give a statement different from Joe Biden right now is almost zero. She may start developing a little different language on the hustings, and she may be different should she be elected. But she's going to be very, very hard-pressed to say that she's on the same page. Put yourself in her position. What if she breaks with him as she walks out of the White House and she's asked, what'd you tell Netanyahu?
We've got to, again, if people can communicate with Kamala Harris, do you want to be president or not? Do you want to win, or do you want to lose a close election like Hubert Humphrey lost in 1968 because he didn't separate himself from a vastly unpopular war position in Vietnam? It's that simple. I mean, if I were advising her and she were listening to me, I would tell Kamala Harris, the first thing you need to do, and by the way, I watched her first campaign speech in Wisconsin after she was the presumptive nominee. It was brilliant. It was great. She avoided the issue of Gaza, unfortunately. She needs to go to Michigan, a key swing state. That's my home state. She needs to go there and meet with those people that led the uncommitted vote. Huge numbers of Democrats voted uncommitted in Michigan. And many of them are Arab and Muslim American leaders that said, no ceasefire, no votes for Biden. Well, she's got to repair that. And in many other states, there are huge numbers of people, multiracial, multi-generational, that want to hear that there's going to be a different position. And those are the best activists. I mean, Ralph, you spent a lifetime teaching activists, instilling in people the ability to be and the know-how, how to be a successful activist. Well, the best activists in this country are those that she needs to bring. You need door knockers, you need phone bankers, and those activists who worked so hard in 2020 to vote Trump out. And Roots Action was part of that. Our slogan was, we sent resources into Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona in 2020. And our slogan was vote Trump out, then challenge Biden. And we've had to challenge Biden from day one. And we've had to challenge Biden from day one of the massacre in Gaza. And it's because of the imperative to defeat Trump that all of these people in 2020 devoted weeks or months of their lives to voting Trump out. Well, we're at that point now. There's 100 days left. And if Kamala Harris wants to attract the most skilled veteran activists to defeat Trump and defeat Trump solidly, she's got to signal that she's going to make changes. There's a new poll that came out on Wednesday that showed Democrats want her to distance herself from Biden. And that's especially true for young Democrats and Democrats of color.
Well, when you say activists, you're also saying people who know how to get out the vote, which is the key. Well, Joe Biden's got 6 months left as president, and he is able to protect Kamala Harris with his rhetoric, saying, I've been for a ceasefire for months. I've been for humanitarian aid, getting the trucks in, which U.S. taxpayers are paying for, thousands of them lined up outside the Gaza border, blocked generally by the Israeli military. I've been for a two-state solution, even though his behavior has been quite contrary to that. And he can also say, I'm against a broader war with Hezbollah, with Iran. He could give her protective cover here just by transferring his rhetoric over to what she should be saying and doing, not just saying and doing. Remember, she's not president. She's number two now, and she won't have any effective power until she's inaugurated if she's elected. So what do you think your policy now, Roots Action, should be on Joe Biden vis-a-vis Kamala Harris?
Yeah, well, look, we've been pushing on Joe Biden since the slaughter in Gaza began. And you're right that Joe Biden could emphasize. I read the letter that you and Bruce Fein sent to Jill Biden, the first lady, where at one meeting it was reported that she spoke out, let's stop this thing, Joe. Let's stop this slaughter. And there's no doubt that Joe Biden could help give her cover. There's been so much pressure brought on Joe Biden. And again, the 7 national unions saying not one more weapon to Israel. That's a big step forward. I am optimistic, that the people, the peace movement, the progressive forces can keep upping the pressure on Joe Biden, up the pressure on presumptive Democratic nominee Kamala Harris, and we could have a veering away from this one-sided policy that for decades has protected a military occupation, and in the last 8 or 9 months, a slaughter of civilians in Gaza. It's gone on for decades. Obviously, the Israel Right or Wrong lobby is powerful. We saw them knock out Jamal Bowman. Roots Action's been part of all of these campaigns against AIPAC, which is the center of the Israel Right or Wrong lobby. And they've brought all this billionaire money and Republican money inside Democratic primaries, while the Democratic leadership has winked and nodded off instead of saying, hey, we don't want Republican money determining who wins Democratic congressional primaries. But they knocked off Jamal Bowman, and now they're trying to knock off Cori Bush. Roots Action is doing all we can to protect Cori Bush, her election in St. Louis, Missouri, the Democratic primary, where AIPAC is bringing Republican money in against Cori Bush because she's against the slaughter, she's against the genocide, she's against the occupation of Palestine.
And she's against spending billions of American taxpayer dollars to destroy the defenseless people in Palestine instead of putting the money back in poor districts like hers in St. Louis, Missouri. Before we go to the questions, I want your take on the savage sadism of the Republicans, led by the fanatic House Speaker Michael Johnson and Congress, and about half of the Democrats who are backing Netanyahu to the hilt, who supported this invitation to him to speak on July 24th, which I wrote a column on, calling it the Congressional Day of Infamy. Anybody who wants to read that can go to nader.org. And then Johnson went overboard when he stated a few days ago that if there is any unruliness in the House of Representatives by the members, he'd have them arrested. I guess as a lawyer, he doesn't know about the speech and debate clause in the Constitution, where members of Congress in Congress can say anything, can hold up posters, can have T-shirts with signs, can exclaim and boo and hiss, and have complete immunity under the speech and debate clause. But this fanatic Johnson, he must be even embarrassing AIPAC, how far he's going to say, in effect, finish off the Palestinians, along with other savage senators like Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton from South Carolina and Arkansas, respectively. I mean, these are statements that the halls of Congress has never heard of before. So talk about Congress being distanced from public opinion around the country.
Yeah, and the polls show how out of touch Congress is. Ralph, you're so right when you talk about the extremism of the leaders of the Republican Party. And it's sickening that half of the Democrats have gone along with them on inviting Netanyahu. But let's face it, the reason we started Step Aside Joe, it was originally called Don't Run Joe, was because we understand that if there's a campaign, an election between generic Ds versus generic Rs, Democrats versus Republicans, because of the extremism of the Republican Party, the public is repelled by that, and the Democrats would win. That's why we want the focus on the Republicans and not on whether Joe Biden was strong enough to be president or too old to be president. So think about the Republican Party. They have denialist agenda on climate change when this is the warmest summer in recorded history, after last summer being the warmest summer in history. They're denialist on abortion rights. They're denialist on guns. They're denialist on saying anything ever that's critical of Israel's conduct, and they're even denialist on whether to accept the results of democratic elections.
And they're denialist on raising the minimum wage. They are aiders and bettors of the corporate crime wave, and they are distinctly and openly anti-union and want to disable the unions and prevent millions of Americans who want to join unions from doing so. And here they are running neck and neck with the Democrats. I guess that tells us that the Democrats are still not rejecting the corporate Democrats in their midst and the huge money they get from Wall Street and other corporate sources. Quickly give your website so people can find out more information about Roots Action.
Sure. People should go to rootsaction.org. We've made that point and we've organized around that point, Ralph, that if we cut the military budget, which has grown year after year under Joe Biden, and we took that money and spent it on healthcare and housing and education, imagine what a society we would have if we uplifted working class people. And, you know, when I look at the Joe Biden, what he ran on in 2020 and the promises that were made that have been broken, if he had kept even half of these promises, the Democrats would be winning in a landslide in 2024. I mean, Ralph, I've followed your instructions to the Democratic Party for years. If they listen to you, if they listen to progressive groups like Roots Action, they would be winning landslide elections. But of course, as you point out, the corporate Democrats, half of the party at least, is just indebted to the corporate donors that won't allow this progressive populist agenda to be heard because it is a winning agenda.
And to substantiate what Jeff has just said, listeners, you can go to winningamerica.net for 24 civic groups showing how Democrats could have landslided the Republicans in 2022 with very clear language, right down from strategies, tactics, get out the vote, even slogans. I'd like to add a couple more to your public investment. That money from producing vastly unneeded weapons of mass destruction, and they're about to spend another $1.5 trillion to upgrade the nuclear bomb arsenal in the U.S. Imagine that. Could also go to modern public transit, expansion of our national parks, reforestation, dealing with soil erosion, as well as protecting our children with a social safety net that Western Europe and Canada has adopted years ago. That's the price of the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower so powerfully warned against in his farewell address as President of the United States, five-star general. Well, our time is up. We've been talking with Jeff Cohen, the co-founder of rootsaction.org, if you want to get more information, with Norman Solomon, and also a lead sponsor of the Step Aside Joe campaign, as well as many other accolades to his curriculum vitae, a retired journalism professor, Ithaca College, founder of the media group FAIR, as David pointed out. Thank you very much, Jeff Cohen.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be with you on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
We've been speaking with Jeff Cohen, and we will link to Roots Action at ralphnaderradiohour.com. Up next, Prop 103 in California has saved policyholders billions of dollars. So why is Governor Gavin Newsom helping the insurance industry try to claw it back? We'll answer that after we check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, July 26, 2024. I'm Russell Mokhiber. Harvard University anthropology professor Susan Greenhalgh has authored a new book titled Soda Science, Making the World Safe for Coca-Cola. It will be published next month by the University of Chicago Press. Soda Science tells the story of how industry leader Coca-Cola mobilized allies in academia to create soda defense science that would protect profits by advocating exercise, not dietary restraint, as the priority solution to obesity, a view few experts accept. Greenhalgh discovers a hidden world of science-making with distinctive organizations, social networks, knowledge-making practices, and ethical claims dedicated to creating industry-friendly science and keeping it under wraps. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman, Hannah, and the rest of the team. And of course, that includes Ralph. You know, California leads the way on a lot of progressive consumer-friendly issues. Why is Governor Newsom siding with the bad guys this time? David?
Harvey Rosenfield is one of the nation's foremost consumer advocates and founder of the advocacy group Consumer Watchdog. Among many other accomplishments, Mr. Rosenfield authored Proposition 103 that has saved consumers hundreds of billions of dollars in auto insurance premiums. He has also co-authored groundbreaking initiatives on HMO reform and utility rate deregulation. He is also the author of the book Silent Violence, Silent Death, The Hidden Epidemic of Medical Malpractice. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Harvey Rosenfield.
David, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, welcome back, Harvey. Let's go back in history as regards to one of the greatest consumer victories of our generation. 1988, the auto insurance industry in California were charging some of the highest rates in the entire country because they weren't regulated. They just filed their rates and they could deny benefits. There was no accountability and no regulation. So both of us decided we were going to go up and down the state of California behind a Proposition 103 initiative on the ballot to regulate the auto insurance companies. Well, they went off the wall. They spent $80 million in those days. That was big money on TV. You could hardly turn on your TV. They were attacking Proposition 103. Our motto was, Prop 103 is for me. And we got good press in the LA Times, especially in the struggle. And lo and behold, we beat them. And the elected insurance commissioner, the regulatory apparatus, led the rates in California for motorist insurance to go from among the highest priced premiums to among the lowest priced premiums. The auto insurance companies fought us, saying they were going to pull out of California. Motorists weren't able to get auto insurance, and it was false. And in intervening years, Robert Hunter, the famous actuary, former federal insurance commissioner, former Texas insurance commissioner, estimated how much Prop 103 saved the motorists of California. What was that figure?
It was $154 billion just on auto insurance.
Billion, listen,
Billion.
154 billion, and continuing year by year. The need for Prop 103 was because the legislature was in the pockets of the auto insurance lobby. There was one giant auto insurance lobbyist. He'd walk in the committee hearing room, stand in the back, and signal the way he wanted the legislators to vote by putting his thumb up or putting his thumb down. I mean, it was a caricature. And the people voted, and they beat the insurance companies. And it reverberated a little bit throughout the country. But the insurance companies never stopped fighting it. It also applied, by the way, to homeowners insurance, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And they fought Harvey and Consumer Watchdog and the consumers tooth and nail, and they kept losing in court. They couldn't get anything in the legislature to cut into it. But then the wildfires of global warming, thank you, ExxonMobil, started, and the inflation hit, and the insurance companies started raising their premiums and saying, it's not us, it's inflation, it's the wildfires. And they're trying to gut Prop 103. With that introduction, Harvey, who I've called a consumer dynamo, take it from there. What are you trying to stop now?
Well, Ralph, first of all, I want to point out for your listeners that as much credit as I have received over the years in Consumer Watchdog, Proposition 103 would never have passed had it not been for your support for it, your frequent visits to California, campaigning all over the state. Some of those memories, although many years distant now, are among my fondest memories. As you say, Ralph, the insurance industry never stopped fighting. Even though they lost at the ballot box, they've constantly tried to relitigate that election. They couldn't believe that the voters would have the temerity to tell the insurance companies how to conduct business in the state of California. And Proposition 103, as you'll recall, required insurance companies to roll back their rates. So they gave $1.2 billion in refunds. And then, as you noted, they're required to open their books and justify their rates before they can go ahead with changing their rates. And that has saved, as I said, $154 billion in auto and untold hundreds of billions of dollars in homeowners coverage. So fast forward to last year, the insurance industry finally found an insurance commissioner, an elected insurance commissioner here in California, who would do their bidding. And they found a good scapegoat, which was the wildfires and climate change. Even though the insurance companies themselves basically subsidize climate change by insuring fossil fuel companies like gasoline companies, refineries, et cetera, they blamed climate change, and they said, we can no longer do business in California in the era of climate change because of Proposition 103. We need to get rid of that law. We need to deregulate. And we're going to start pulling out of communities all over the state, create shortages in order to pressure the legislature and the insurance commissioner to go along with their agenda, which was to eliminate or limit the application of Proposition 103. Ralph, sometimes it reminds me of the campaign for Prop 103 36 years ago. We're fighting in the legislature. The governors come out against Prop 103. Many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are against Prop 103. And really, the only folks for Prop 103 are the people of California who voted for it and who are now being forced to pay massive rate increases in home and auto insurance, some of which are unjustified. We have been successful at Consumer Watchdog, which you can find at consumerwatchdog.org. Our nonprofit group has actually ourselves used the power of Prop 103 to block $6 billion in rate increases since 2003. And the insurance companies are holding that against us. They can't stand that system, Ralph, and they're attacking our ability to go in and fight for consumers. But consumers, for every $100 of savings that we've been able to achieve in blocking unjustified rate increases, consumers had to pay 25 cents. Pretty good deal. So maybe I should stop there, and that's where we are now.
Well, part of Prop 103 was to require the insurance commissioner to be an elected office. And you had some good luck there with John Garamendi, who's now a member of Congress from California, but not so much with the present elected insurance commissioner, who's turned against Prop 103, has begun taking a lot of campaign money from the insurance companies. His name is Ricardo Lara. Tell us about his role and how he influenced Governor Newsom. They're all in a panic now because when the insurance companies want to get their way, they skyrocket the premiums. And of course, all kinds of motorists are saying, what's going on here? What's going on here?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the insurance industry, as I mentioned now, they are orchestrating shortages in the state, which puts leverage on the commissioner to grant rate increases and to proceed with deregulation, which he is doing. He is going to eliminate or limit a lot of the protections that have been put in place under Prop 103. He can't change the law itself. Neither he nor Governor Newsom nor any member of the legislature can undermine Prop 103 because it's a voter-approved initiative. It's protected by the state constitution. But Ricardo Lara has gone to the dark side. I'm sorry to say we had high hopes for him. He initially, as just mentioned, he initially took some money from the insurance industry, violating a norm that most other insurance commissioners in the state have respected since the voters made it an elected position. Lara has given that money back, or so he says, but he has never met with a consumer group. He's never met with anybody at Consumer Watchdog to discuss what he's doing since 2 months after he took office. And as those of you who aren't lawyers in the audience probably can appreciate, when the voters pass a law, that's the law that nobody else can change it, as I mentioned. But over the last 36 years, the elected insurance commissioners have put in place a lot of regulations that implement and enforce that law. And those, the insurance commissioner, the current commissioner, Ricardo Lara, he wants to take away those protections. And the result will be devastating increases in insurance premiums that'll make it even more unaffordable for those who can even find insurance in California now.
What's the level of the increase? 20%, 30%? And don't they have to prove the case and open their books before the insurance commissioner approves?
That's correct. The level of increases have been in the 20 to 30% range, multiple increases over the last few years. And I'm going to preview something that by the time your audience hears this show will be revealed. State Farm has requested a 30% across the board increase in its home insurance premiums, not because State Farm has acknowledged that it doesn't need this increase in order to cover expected losses in the future. It's actually acknowledged that if that were the criterion, it should reduce its rates by 9%. But the company is now a standalone affiliate of the parent company based in Illinois. The State Farm Homeowners Insurance Company in California is an affiliate, and it says it's in dire financial distress and wants the public to pay billions of dollars, not to cover future losses, but to bail the company out, to recapitalize the company. And there's going to be a big battle here in California over whether policyholders in the state can be forced to invest in a company like State Farm.
Well, Harvey Rosenfield, I remember in 1988, so many of the insurance companies fighting this proposed initiative on the California ballot, Prop 103, threatened to pull out. They said they couldn't afford lower rates. Well, after it was passed and the rates went down, they stayed in and they made a lot of profit. The way insurance companies make profits are very complex and murky. And they've really never together shown a losing year since the 1920s when the first records were being kept. But in other states, they don't have an initiative process that can save homeowners and motorists. And in Florida, because of the hurricanes and other natural calamities connected with climate disruption, the homeowner rates have skyrocketed, sea levels increasing, flooding, and the governor of that state, DeSantis, and the legislature actually started subsidizing with taxpayer dollars the insurance function for homeowners. What's going on around the country? Can you give us a glimpse about Florida and other places? Is there turmoil everywhere?
Turmoil everywhere, Ralph. The insurance companies say different things in different states. For example, here in California, they're blaming Proposition 103. They're saying there's too much regulation. In Florida, they got completely deregulated and they're still raising rates and leaving the state. In other states, like Louisiana, for example, the insurance companies are complaining that there's too much litigation. And that's why rates have to go through the roof. And that's why they can't afford to do business. So this kind of economic blackmail, boycotting state after state in order to up their profits, has worked in the past for the insurance companies. And this is what they're doing now. And it's easy to predict that as their bottom line improves, as the stock market improves, they had a bad year last year for their investments, they'll start coming back into these states with the promise of far higher rates, and things will calm down. But in the meantime, people will have been soaked for tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars nationwide.
Well, with the advent of the COVID pandemic in 2020, the number of vehicle mileage went down. People parked their cars. There wasn't that kind of traffic jams because of the pandemic and people staying home. And under almost all insurance state laws, rates have to be, quote, fair and reasonable, end quote. That's the phrase. So under these state laws, they should have been required to refund money. And in 2020, in a lot of states, they refunded small checks to auto owners and then stopped. And according to Bob Hunter, there's $30 billion with a B that they're holding back, that they should have refunded the motorists under the fair and reasonable criteria. California did a better job, the regulators, but they still owe Californians money. But there are people in New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, Missouri, Florida, all of whom can get a nice check refunded, but the insurance commissioners are just sitting on their derriere, maybe some of them waiting to get jobs after they resign with the insurance companies. I sent a letter to all the insurance commissioners. I only got one response from Texas, and I sent a letter to the National Insurance Commissioners Association, and they sent me a long, drawn-out letter indicating that, they were going to pay attention to it. But $30 billion, and they're investing it, obviously, and making money off it, belongs to you, the motorist. That's real money. What's the situation in California?
Well, as you pointed out, it's a little bit of good news and still a significant amount of bad news. Because of the Prop 103 out here, the insurance commissioner ordered the insurance companies to pay refunds. We calculated that just for the first year, 2020, which is the height of the pandemic, when all of our cars were sheltering in place along with the rest of us at our homes, we calculated that the insurance companies, by failing to reduce their rates appropriately, had collected $5.9 billion more in auto insurance. And of that, only about $2 billion was returned for the year 2020. So we're looking at least $3 billion that the insurance commissioner of California allowed the insurance companies to keep in their pockets that belong to us. And we're fighting that out in court right now, as a matter of fact, in one case. But as I say, we did better here because of Proposition 103 than other states where, as you noted, the regulators are often completely in the tank, in the pockets of the insurance lobby. And there wasn't much of an effort made to refund anything. And you can't make them refund anything in most states.
Well, Connecticut is a notorious insurance company haven. We're listened to on WGBH in Bridgeport. But I say to people in Connecticut and people all over the country, call up or email or send a letter to your insurance commissioner and say, where's my check? Where's the money? You haven't required the insurance companies to rebate and refund. And by the way, they know all about this. They have files, they have data, they can answer the question of how much should be refunded. So they can't hide behind some actuarial complexity here. So just ask them, where's our check? We got a check in 2020, maybe, if you did indeed get that, listener, but where's the rest of it? And $30 billion divided by millions of consumers is still a useful amount of money. Before we go to Steve for the question, Harvey, we're talking with Harvey Rosenfield, one of the founders with Jamie Court of Consumer Watchdog, based in Santa Monica, California, real consumer protection tigers, taking no quarters. And before we go to Steve, tell us what kind of information people can get from your website and what your website is.
The website is Consumer Watchdog, all one word, .org. And there's a lot of information there about the battle that we're in now to protect Californians against excessive insurance premiums. Quite a bit of information, lots of information about how Proposition 103 works for people outside of California who want to know more, maybe want to propose their local legislators enact something similar, because that's the only solution to the problem we're all facing all over the country is an out of control insurance industry. The only way to get them back under control is to regulate them.
I got to ask you another question. You worked for a long time with attorney Laura Antonini to draft a modern, updated consumer protection code or law that could be passed in state after state, because the consumer protection laws are weak, they're old, the penalties are ridiculous, they're not keeping up with modern technology and modern forms of corporate crime. Tell us a little bit about that model consumer code and how people can get it, and ask their state legislatures to put it in, as we're about to do, by the way, in New York State.
Well, we did a 4-year study of the consumer protection laws in the United States, how consumers are protected or unprotected against corporate greed and abuse. And we found that the system is basically rigged now because of legislation at the state level, federal legislation, and court decisions. The judicial system in the United States is rigged to protect big corporate defendants at the expense of the average person. And so we looked at how people are nickeled and dimed out of billions of dollars in every aspect of their interaction in the marketplace. And we proposed a series of reforms that would balance the powers, give consumers much more protection so that they could take matters into their own hands if necessary, go to court and punish these companies, not just with requiring them to refund abuses, but to penalize companies that gamble that they won't get caught if they break the law, if they violate the contract that they have with you. All of that information, and it's one of the most things I'm most proud of in my career, can be found at representconsumers, all one word, .org. representconsumers.org. And the report was co-authored by, as you noted, Laura Antonidi. She did an amazing job over that 4-year period. And I think it will stand the test of time. And our, view was that when people start giving up on the judicial branch of government, there's no other branch left. And I think the polls in this country show now that people feel disenfranchised and left unprotected by all the branches of government. And that's what we were trying to address.
I thought your 100-page backup full of detail about the failures of the existing system of consumer laws and all the abuses that are proliferating in a corporate crime wave was really very unique. And that's part of what you'll get when you go to that website, listeners. Steve?
Harvey, you mentioned the word blackmail. And when I read accounts of what's going on, it's Governor Newsom saying we need to approve these rate hikes faster because we need to stabilize the industry. And so if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is the insurance industry itself has destabilized it in order to put everybody over a barrel to say, oh, we need to do these rate hikes faster. Is that a correct summary?
Absolutely correct. It's fascinating that the one piece of legislation Governor Newsom is carrying in California at the behest of the insurance industry right now is legislation that would curtail the ability that consumers have under Proposition 103 to monitor and challenge applications for excessive rates. Think about this for a second, because it's a really illuminating aspect of what happened with Proposition 103. When the voters passed Proposition 103, and I'm paraphrasing Ralph now, they recognized that a law that left it to the politicians to implement wouldn't necessarily go into effect the right way. So the voters put into Proposition 103 their own right to come in and force the insurance companies to justify their rates or their practices to legal challenges before the State Department of Insurance or the courts. Of all the provisions of Proposition 103, this is the one that the insurance industry hates the most. It's the one that Governor Newsom is carrying to try to repeal the part of Prop 103 that allows consumers to independently challenge what the companies are doing. Exactly the situation we're in now, where the elected insurance commissioner is siding with the industry. This is why consumers need their own protection through representation to go up against the lawyers for the insurance industry, which consumers also pay for. So it's fascinating to me. I came across, Steve, some testimony that one of Ralph's organizations, Congress Watch, made in 1979. It was all about public participation in regulatory activity at the federal level. And we took Ralph's ideas and put them right into Prop 103. And that's the thing that the insurance industry hates the most. It wasn't the rollback. It wasn't even being required to justify their rates, because they figure if they could buy off the commissioner, they could just get away with it. But 103 gives people the independent power to protect themselves, which is
what Harvey's referring to, Steve, is called intervener funding. The insurance companies lobby the state of California, for example, and the insurance commissioner. They use your consumer premiums to pay for those lobbyists. What Prop 103 did was provide for paying credible insurance groups who are intervening and don't have much of a budget to begin with, obviously, to be paid for their intervention in the proceedings affecting the rates and other aspects of insurance policies in California. And that's what the insurance companies, as Harvey said, can't stand. But let's ask a contrarian question before we go to David. Harvey, is there any time when an insurance rate hike is valid and should be approved?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, we have, over the course of the last year and a half, we've examined a lot of these applications for rate increases closely. And it's true that inflation has gone up. The cost of repairing homes or cars has increased substantially. Cars themselves are far more expensive to repair now because they're so stuffed with electronics. There were problems during pandemic and after with the supply chain, which also raised prices. And arguably, some people around the country and here in California aren't driving as carefully as they used to prior to the pandemic. And I would say I've experienced this myself, sort of a general sense of lawlessness on the roads in some areas. And, perhaps that came from the very top 4 or 5 years ago. But those increases that are justified can, under Proposition 103, and should be allowed so that the insurance companies can cover claims. We want them to cover claims, and under Prop 103, they can cover claims and earn a reasonable profit while doing so. And as you mentioned earlier, Ralph, homeowners insurance companies have made better profits overall in California than across the United States over the last 20 years or so. So we want the companies to stay in business. We just don't want them ripping us off. And that is the beauty of a system in which you can analyze a request for a rate increase and decide how much of it, if any, is justified.
We're trying to get the insurance companies to pay more attention to loss prevention and support stronger motor vehicle safety standards. They made huge money when the motor vehicle safety standards were issued in the 1960s. Seat belts, later airbags, collapsible steering columns, side and rollover protection, etc. That kept down the immense costs of loss of life and injury. And the same thing could happen in homes. I understand the insurance companies are now researching how homes can be built with stronger fire prevention resistance to these fires that are going on in California and elsewhere. And that's the job of the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which we helped start with Joan Claybrook. After Prop 103, the insurance companies were on the defensive. They were moaning and groaning. Their reputation was tarnished. And they came around and helped start the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which is produced right down to the local level in terms of highway improvements, traffic improvements, driver improvements, motor vehicle improvements, billions and billions of dollars in loss prevention, which went to the bottom line and made more profit for the insurance companies. So we have to hold up these insurance companies to their obligation to reduce losses, not just to raise rates based on higher claims. You reduce losses by a safer environment and safer products and safer standards. David?
Let me ask a contrarian question, too. You say the only way to get the insurance companies under control is to regulate them. Let me ask you about a public option. As most listeners know, before getting Obamacare passed, Obama pulled the public health insurance option out of the bill after Senator Joe Lieberman, Democrat in the pocket of the insurance industry, threatened to filibuster. He was from Connecticut, which, as Ralph pointed out, is a haven for the insurance industry. What was the public health insurance option? Are there any states that have attempted public insurance for homeowners? Nobody in Florida can get homeowner insurance. With climate change, what do you think the chances are of the government eventually being forced to provide a public option for homeowners?
David, that's really an astute question. And it's one that the insurance companies themselves are putting on the table because they're pulling out of state after state. They're complaining that they don't want to do business with everybody, that they don't want to sell insurance to certain neighborhoods around the state. And so they're making people, what they're doing is forcing people to go to state subsidized plans. For example, California, Florida, both have an insurance plan of last resort, which is run by insurance companies, of course, where the coverage is terrible. The prices are higher even than in the marketplace. But if you're turned down by a private company, you can go there and get some coverage. So the insurance industry's own behavior is sort of calling the question on whether they even want to do business in these states. I mean, they would like to sell you a policy only if you'll never file a claim. And of course, people buy insurance in order to be able to file a claim in the unlikely event that, terrible event that you experience a misfortune. So I think it's very rational to start discussing that. But I haven't seen any state, including California, really proceed with that. British Columbia used to have, I know this, up in Canada, used to have a state-run auto insurance system. But I think your question is one that many consumer advocates and people on the street will ask. Well, if the private companies don't want my business, why do we need them? Why do we need them and their inflated budgets and their expenses and their massive executive salaries? Let's insure it ourselves. Let's self-insure, as it were. But also the times are such these days that, people have lost confidence in government, and for good reason. And that was one of the things that really inspired me to keep fighting for Prop 103 and for consumers over the last 36 years. I really wanted people to see that government can be made to work for people, not just for the special interests. So I don't know when the timing is going to be right for that. I would say right now myself.
Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. We've been talking with Harvey Rosenfield, co-founder of ConsumerWatchdog.org out of Santa Monica, California. And before we close, Harvey, give that website again for your model consumer protection law that we should try to get introduced in state legislatures around the country.
So for that consumer protection law, it's www.representconsumers.org. Everything is up there. It's like a sort of package. You could just download it and fly with it. And for more information on the California battle over insurance rates, come to consumerwatchdog.org.
Thank you very much, Harvey. To be continued. We'll be watching your struggle out in California because it reverberates, as is so often the case, across the country.
Thank you, Ralph, so much. It's been an honor to be on your show.
We've been speaking with Harvey Rosenfield. We will link to Consumer Watchdog at ralphnaderradiohour.com. I want to thank our guests again, Jeff Cohen and Harvey Rosenfield. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up, featuring Francesco DeSantis with In Case You Haven't Heard. A transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer is Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon. Our social media manager is Stephen Wendt.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, everybody. For all the readers out there, I've come out with another book. This one is not as large as my collection of columns, which I described as a dual-purpose book to read and to hold as a doorstop. This one's called Let's Start the Revolution. Very, very readable in print size and very, very timely for 2024. Information about how to get my new book, just go to nader.org. You can also sign up for automatic transmission of my weekly column for free.
I'm only trying to school you. Listen to me, people. Do you understand we gotta stand up? Oh, you've been sitting way too long. Oh, step up. You know what's right and you know what's wrong.